Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Natalie. Welcome to
Seizure Talk. Today we will be exploring new depths of the wonderful magical world of felines. Ooh.
Yes, folks, you know it's sad. Kitties can have seizures too. It happens.
Now let's get started. First, a general overview.
Seizures occur when neurotransmitters in the brain have abnormal electrical activity. All seizures originate in a region of the brain called the cerebrum.
The cerebrum is made up of 4 lobes: the frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital. Since this is where seizures originate, they affect personality, speech, motor development, memory, language acquisition, sensation and perception, and vision.
Seizures can be caused by genetics, head trauma, brain conditions, infectious diseases, prenatal injuries, or developmental disorders.
There are distinguishable types of seizures that can occur as well. They essentially fall under 2 categories: focal and generalized.
Focal seizures branch into simple partial seizures and complex partial seizures.
Generalized seizures also fall into 2 subcategories: grand mal and petit mal.
But we're not talking about focal seizures today.
Or petit mal seizures. Our focus is grand mal seizures.
These generally cause a cat, or for today's scenario, him, to fall on his side and have uncontrollable muscle convulsions such as kicking, biting, scratching, involuntary urinating, and defecating.
The cat becomes unaware of his owner, of his surroundings, and even of his own actions.
A number of systems within the body that are affected by grand mal seizures include respiratory, circulatory, muscular, skeletal, urinary, nervous, and endocrine system.
In regards to his respiratory system, the cat may experience coughing and a shortness of breath.
This could be due to the uncontrollable convulsions of the body that cut off his airways.
The upper respiratory tract includes the mouth, pharynx, and larynx. And the lower tract includes the trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, and alveoli.
If airways of the lungs are partially cut off, the cat could be at risk of suffocation. Also, the airways could constrict completely due to the muscles that support the respiratory system contracting uncontrollably.
The diaphragm is a major muscle of the respiratory system that aids as a vacuum in the processes of inspiration and expiration.
During inspiration, the thoracic cavity expands and pushing the diaphragm down into the abdominal region. In expiration, the diaphragm relaxes back into its original resting position.
Through inspiration and expiration, the lungs expand and contract to fill with the oxygen needed to supply the entire body.
Breathing is an essential function to sustaining life due to the need of oxygen within any organism.
Another system affected by seizures is the circulatory system.
The cat's heart rhythm could be interfered with by the seizure.
The heart is the central organ of the circulatory system, pumping blood throughout the body constantly over the span of the being's life.
Blood is made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, and plasma, which contains platelets.
Matured red blood cells, called hemoglobin, transport oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body, while white blood cells fight off diseases.
First entering through the superior and inferior vena cava, deoxygenated blood follows this path through the heart to complete a cardiac cycle.
It goes into the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, through the pulmonary valve, then the pulmonary artery, and finally into the lungs, where it will be oxygenated.
The blood then leaves the lungs, going into the pulmonary veins, into the left atrium, through the bicuspid valve, then to the left ventricle, and through the aortic valve to the aorta to be pumped to the rest of the body through the arteries.
The arteries take the blood throughout the body and exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. Arteries branch off into arterioles.
The blood then reaches the capillaries, which are even smaller, and travels to exchange areas where red blood cells will take blood with carbon dioxide through the venules, which will gradually grow into veins, and the blood reaches the vena cava to re-enter the heart to begin the cycle again.
The cardiac cycle is caused by electrical impulses in specialized cells that make up the heart that can contract.
Due to a seizure, these electrical impulses can be sped up or stalled, increasing the risk of going into cardiac arrest.
Now we have the endocrine system. This includes all the major glands within the body: the pituitary, pineal, thyroid, thymus, adrenal glands, and gonads.
These glands produce and regulate hormones. The essential job of all hormones is to maintain homeostasis within the body, but they also have the ability to influence seizure frequency and affecting brain cells.
The pituitary gland, the powerhouse of all cells, controls communication between glands and regulates hormone release. It's housed within the Turkish seat of the brain.
Both the anterior and posterior pituitary release important hormones that deal with reproduction, growth, metabolism, thermal activity, skin cells, pain tolerance, and water balance.
The abnormal electrical activity that occurs during a grand mal seizure in the brain, where the pituitary gland is located, can alter the homeostasis that hormones are supposed to regulate.
For example, studies show that epilepsy can affect regulation of luteinizing and follicle-stimulating hormones, which in turn affects fertility.
Next stop, the muscular system. The muscles of the body are not only meant for physical activities such as lifting objects or running.
They are also vital to support the necessary functions of daily life.
This system is especially significant in reference to grand mal seizures because one of the identifying traits of a grand mal seizure is uncontrollable muscle activity.
We are going to focus on the cat's leg as if it were kicking involuntarily while cat is seizing. Several muscles that in the leg that could be affected include the rectus femoris, biceps femoris, soleus, gastrocnemius, adductor femoris, sartorius, and gracilis.
All of these can be classified under different categories.
There are skeletal, cardiac, or smooth muscles.
Skeletal and cardiac muscle is striated. Smooth muscle is unstriated.
Skeletal muscle is voluntary, and cardiac and smooth muscles is involuntary.
While all of these muscles in the leg can be affected, our focus today will be the biceps femoris.
The biceps femoris is a skeletal muscle, making it striated and voluntary.
In regards to the physiology or function of the biceps femoris, this muscle extends the thigh and flexes the leg.
The actual contraction takes place through the nephron's communication and allowing the sarcomere to contract the muscle.
This happens with the aid of the myofibrils, myosin, actin, and titin.
While seizing involuntary extension of the thigh and leg and the flexing of the leg increases created by the biceps femoris contributes to the kicking motion that is just one of the many uncontrollable movements that the cat may be doing.
Now we move on to the urinary system, which begins with the kidneys, continues through the ureters, and into the bladder, where waste is expelled out of the body through the urethra.
A common effect of a grand mal seizure is loss of fecal and urinary control.
Excretion is a major bodily function that the voluntary skeletal muscle involved is usually able to control under healthy conditions, but while suffering a seizure, if the kitty has to go, he's going to go.
Holding it until he reaches his nearest litter box is, unfortunately, not an option.
Next is the skeletal system. It is the primary support structure of the body, including muscular functions, so loss of control during a seizure includes the muscular and skeletal systems in conjunction with one another.
The bones of the skeletal system support and protect the body and serve as levers for muscular action, serve as a storehouse for elements such as calcium and phosphorus, serve as factory for red blood cells and several kinds of white blood cells, and in adult cats aid in fat storage.
The skeletal system is located throughout the body, but focusing back in on the leg, we're going to talk about the femur, fibula, and tibia.
The superior end of the femur articulates with the pelvis at the hip joint, and the inferior end articulates with the tibia and fibula, which are parallel to each other.
These are significant in a seizing cat because the primary part of their function is to bear the weight of his body.
If the grand mal seizure causes loss of control in the skeletal system in the leg, these will be not able to support the weight of the cat and he could fall over.
Last but most certainly not least, we'll be exploring the nervous system, which consists of the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system.
Deeper within the nervous system, there are afferent neurons, which are sensory neurons that go into the brain, and efferent neurons, which are motor neurons that travel throughout the body to communicate messages from the brain.
Action potential is what causes neurons to perform their function.
A neuron receives neurotransmitters that contain acetylcholine within their dendrites.
In the soma, the cell is unbalanced with sodium and potassium and is at resting potential with a charge of negative 70 millivolts.
The neurotransmitters then cause the neuron to go into a threshold state at negative 55 millivolts.
Sodium and potassium ions move in and out of the cell, which gains excitement, and the ions balance out, causing the cell to fire in a process called depolarization. It ends up at 30 millivolts.
The message being transferred then shoots down the axon to the terminals of the neuron. Vesicles at the end are pushed out to release neurotransmitters into the cleft.
Here, the message is picked up by the dendrites of the next neuron, and the cycle repeats.
A neuron that is just fired goes into the processes of repolarization, shooting back into a negative state at negative 90 millivolts, so the signal cannot go back up the axon the opposite way.
Finally, the neuron goes into a recovery phase at negative 70 millivolts, where it may start the process again.
A seizure may affect the cat's senses, which are part of his peripheral nervous system. Sight and hearing are examples of these senses that could be inhibited or cut off, leading to temporary deafness or blindness.
The central nervous system includes the brain and spine, which are associated with motor communication.
During a seizure, the brain experiences abnormal electrical activity. It cannot communicate properly through the nervous system to the rest of the body, and therefore cannot send the correct messages that abnormally trigger the body to perform involuntary actions.
Normally trigger the body. So the nervous system is clearly an integral part of the body being able to function. If a cat is experiencing a seizure, the nervous system cannot function correctly, and subsequently the rest of the body cannot function correctly.
As we wrap up seizure talk, you can see that the seizures affect many systems of the body. Due to the abnormal electrical impulses of the brain, the body cannot function correctly.
A cat is experiencing a grand mal seizure, specifically, will have uncontrollable muscle convulsions that is completely unaware of.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for watching Seizure Talk, all your latest and greatest keep-ups and shakedowns of the wonderful magical world of seizures. Woo!